change someone's life for the better today.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today's podcast, it was all going to be about points leagues. It's still going to mainly be about points leagues, but of course we have had some news in the last couple of hours regarding Jim Butler and the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we'll talk briefly about that before we get into the nitty-gritty with points leagues. Tomorrow's show, I'm going to be doing a mock draft for points leagues using the standard scoring system, FanDuel, ESPN, Yahoo, that standard points scoring system, which all of those sites adopted last year. So we'll talk about that with a mock draft tomorrow and in today's show as well. Michael Bolton's ready.
Let's get to it.
Mike wants to hear about Jimmy Butler. So let's start with Jim Butler, who today officially requested a trade away from the Minnesota Timberwolves. Obviously, the relationship with Tom Thibodeau and his nonsense coaching and shithouse management has become a real issue for Jim. Who could have possibly seen that coming? An absolute stunner of a shocker of a real... look, he's a brilliant man, Thibodeau, and Butler wants out. Now, as I talked about on yesterday's podcast, I believe the auction mock draft, there's issues Butler has with Thibodeau, Butler has with Towns. There's a massive element to this that Butler's a shit bloke. We've seen this before. He had some shit bloke tendencies in Chicago. I believe that was some of the reason the package for him wasn't quite as high as it may have been. And now, look, a similar sort of thing. But, I think Thibodeau has to shoulder majority of the blame for this situation. Now, of course, Tibbs has come out and said that he won't be trading Butler and he's going to be pushing for the playoffs. I think they'll probably miss the playoffs regardless. This season with the Lakers and the Nuggets pushing in, and I think the Blazers and the Wolves probably miss out. The Spurs could be also in that mix as well. We'll see how that all pans out. But it is an interesting scenario here with Butler. He's apparently nominated 3 teams that he'd be willing to sign contract extensions with, and that is a weird group of teams, to be honest. Obviously, Jimmy just wants the bright lights, so he's going Brooklyn and the Knicks, the 2 New York teams, and the Clippers. No Lakers because he doesn't want to be in LeBron's shadow. There's definitely an element of chip on the shoulder with Jim Butler. He wants to be the greatest. He's not. He's not as good as he thinks he is. He's still really solid and he's done a fantastic job to get where he is. But, wants this big market. I don't know. There's something about this bloke that rubs me the wrong way. Yes, he's got a giant aquarium in his house and it looks pretty cool. But apart from that, it's just something that just doesn't sit right with me with Jim Butler. And I've said that for quite a while now. They're the 3 teams he wants to go to. Now, whether that gets done or not, I don't know. Thibodeau said he won't be trading him and wants to make the playoffs. But I guess if there's one thing that Thibodeau is known for, it's being extremely flexible and changing his mind on decisions he's made. He's always been really keen on doing that, as you can tell by his modern approach to player management, modern medicine, resting and fatigue. He's all about everything. He's ahead of the curve in every single sense of the word. Yeah. So these 3 teams that he goes to, what's it going to do if he goes to these teams? Or he could get sent anywhere. He could get sent to bloody Memphis for all I know. We just don't know at this point. So I had Jimmy Butler as a turn of the first, second round sort of a guy. I think with those nominations of those teams, he's pretty solid in that area. He will probably lose some minutes. He's not going to Brooklyn and playing 37 minutes a night. The Knicks have said they won't be trading assets to get players this season who they could get in free agency next year. So maybe that does rule them out. The Clippers, they have a ton of assets that they can package off. They're very deep without a star, so they could be sending, Avery Bradley. They could be sending Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They could send 2 or 3 guys to Minnesota and to create some space there for Butler. But I don't think, again, he's playing 37 minutes per night. But if he goes to 35 minutes per night, I think that's a realistic estimation. Maybe it's 36. But you see a 3 or 4 percentage point jump in his usage, and you see an increase in ball handling responsibilities. Whichever team of those 3 he goes to, he becomes the best player immediately. He also probably becomes the best point guard. Is he better than Patrick Beverley? Is he better than Milos Teodosic? Is he better than Shai at the Clippers? Yes. Is he better than D'Angelo Russell or Spencer Dinwiddie or Karis LeVert? Yes. Is he better than Trey Burke or Frank Ntilikina? Absolutely. So wherever he goes, I think his assists rise. He becomes more of a James Harden type of a guy, with some of those minutes dropping down. And I think that the change in, maybe he loses efficiency increases usage, increases assists, loses minutes. And the balance of those two, I think, probably keeps him in that same area, in that zone between 12 to 15, that sort of an area. Now, the injury concern is still going to be there. The injuries is not solely due to Thibodeau. Some of it is, but even when Tom was gone and Fred Hoiberg was unable to assert any sort of his own will on the team and still played Butler 37 minutes a night, Jim still got injured over there in Chicago. I don't think that would happen under Doc. Kenny Atkinson, I don't think would allow that either. I'm not sure how Fizdale would approach it, but I don't think he'd be doing that also. So maybe that does reduce some of Butler's injury risk, or maybe he just is someone that constantly gets injured. That is a possibility too. So that's a risk, and it always seems to be February, March that Butler goes down right in your head-to-head playoffs. But I still think he's pretty solid around that back end of the first, probably more start of the second round type of guy. Like I'd have a Paul George and Joel Embiid over him, but I'd have Butler right in that Victor Oladipo mix in a category type format. So that's all I'm talking about with Butler at the moment, because we just don't know where he's going, if he's going. And if that does go down, then we'll have a podcast dedicated to the ramifications of Jim Butler. Moving on. Let's talk points leagues. I'm not a big fan of points leagues. I'll say this straight up. And that is because I believe a lot of the nuance in fantasy basketball is taken away by playing in a points league. You don't have 9 categories or 8 categories to judge a player on. You have one, and that is how many points they score when you're doing a draft. And I say you shouldn't be ranking guys, and you shouldn't be, if you're just ranking guys and drafting off a ranking list, you'll end up losing because it might as well be auto draft. Well, in a points league, you can pretty much do that because you just want the guy who you project is going to score more points. In a trade, that's what you want. Does this guy give me more points than the other guy? Then if so, I won. If not, I lost. Now, people will come at me, go, but then you've got to be able to project. What if their points go up later in the season or their points go down? Of course, but that is exactly what you're projecting when you're looking at these deals, and all that goes, 8-fold, 9-fold for category leagues. So I understand the purpose of points leagues. I think they are not great. I am in a few more this year, especially the draft-only best ball type formats. And I think in Dynasty and with contract-type leagues, points leagues do work out quite well because it's adding contracts, adding Dynasty, adding salaries adds so much more level of complication to a league. And if you add categories in there, it can become a little bit overwhelming. So you can just say, well, these are what the players do in terms of scoring, but how do we balance that against their contract, against the cost, against the years, against the win now, win later mentality? So points dynasty leagues, I'm all about them. I think they're fine. Season-long leagues, not so much, but I know many of you are playing them, so we are going to do a podcast on them because I'm trying to cater to everybody and not just the people that play category leagues. So when we're talking about points leagues, what is the default scoring system that I'm talking about? Well, what it is, as I said, it runs on ESPN, it runs on Yahoo, and it runs on FanDuel for DFS. This is the standard scoring. I think the standard on Fantrax is a little bit different. What it is 1 point for every point that you score, 1.2 points for every rebound, 1.5 points for every assist, 3 points for a steal, 3 points for a block, and -1 point for a turnover. So absolutely no impact on efficiency. It doesn't matter if you score 20 points on 50 shots or 20 points on 10 shots, you will get the same amount of points in a standard fantasy points league. Some people will throw in points for free throws made or free throws missed, or points for double-doubles or a 20-point triple-double bonus. And I'm really anti-triple-doubles and double-doubles, especially at the moment, and even more so in points leagues, getting that extra bonus. You've already got the bonus by getting 10 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, and then adding another 20 on that seems unfair to me when if someone comes in and gets 999, instead of being 3 points less, they're 23 points less. It just seems ridiculous that would be the case. So if you are setting up a points league as commissioner, piss off double-double bonuses, piss off triple-double bonuses. They are nonsense. What I am trying to do, and seeing how it goes, is John Hollinger, who in the Memphis Grizzlies front office, developed the PER stat, but he also developed another stat called game score, which is derived from PER, but it doesn't take into consideration pace and rate. It's more a volume accumulation stat, and you can use that as a fantasy points score. It does take into account efficiency. It increases the volume or the weight of an offensive rebound. It's 0.7 points for an offensive rebound, 0.3 for a defensive rebound. So offensive rebounding more important. It takes away points for free throws missed. It takes away points for field goals attempted. It takes away points for personal fouls as well. And you can have a look and you can check it on Basketball Monster. No, it's on Basketball Monster, but you can check it on, by setting up your categories that way. On Basketball Reference, you can see game scores of players. A game of 40 is a really high game score, 10 is about average, and that's how that game score scale works. But I'm trying that in a 30-team best ball league as the scoring system, which does take, of course, efficiency, turnovers, fouls, and weighs up the importance of offensive rebound. It also really drops the importance of blocks down from 3 to 0.7, based on Hollinger's idea of blocks not being that important in terms of winning actual games. Well, steals are at 1 still, and assists are down at 0.72, not as impactful as, say, so an assist is as impactful in that scenario as an offensive rebound. And the same as a block. So that's the way that system goes. But we're talking about that default settings with the 3 points per steal, 3 points per block, which really does give some value to some big men. So I'm going to look at this in 3 different categories. What I want to look at first is players based on the ADP. Now, most of the ADP numbers on Yahoo and ESPN is based on category leagues because that's the majority of the leagues. So you'll go into your draft in a points league and you'll see rank and you'll see ADP, and it will be based on category leagues. But your values of these guys change quite a bit. So what I'm looking at here is which players based on their current ADPs. I'm using Yahoo as a base here. Which players look to be the biggest points league type steals based on their ADP. At the moment, some of these ADPs are going to change, but there's a bunch of guys I've got here. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, look, he projects to be about 80 spots higher than his ADP for points league, so that's very important to pay attention to. DeJounte Murray and De'Aaron Fox, a couple of young point guards. They've got pretty low ADPs, but their value is nice and high there for points leagues. Will Cauley-Stein, another value guy. I think he's about 55 spots higher than what his ADP is. He is another guy that can put up some pretty nice numbers as maybe as a top 70 guy in a points league, which I think is pretty important to be able to note. Hollis-Jefferson, as I said, he's probably a top 60 guy, but he's got an ADP outside the top 120. Reggie Jackson in Detroit, another guy who is really hurt by his lack of efficiency in a category league. He looks to be, he's an ADP of 130. He looks to be a top 90 guy in a points league, so real value there. Luka Doncic, well, that ADP is it's so high on Yahoo. I don't know why it's at 93. It is coming down a little bit. It was outside the top 100, but I think he still projects to be a top 75 type of a guy in points leagues. The table, Montrezl Harrell and Yusuf Nurkic, a couple of big men who do really benefit from the scoring system. Nurkic is probably a top 50 guy in points leagues. That's because his poor free throw shooting does hurt him in category leagues. Same with the table, Montrezl Harrell, high rebounding, pretty strong scoring for a big man, and their ADPs make them pretty significant steals. Now, if you are watching the video, you can see that second column I've got there, which is points versus categories, and that's showing how much better a player projects to be in a points league versus a category league. So the first column is Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. He's 84 spots higher in a points league versus his ADP, but points versus category, he's 22 spots higher. So you can see he still seems to be underrated by ADP for categories, but it's significantly higher for his for the points leagues, and all of those there, like De'Aaron Fox, gets a big bump. Willie Cauley-Stein gets a big bump. Yusuf Nurkic gets a big bump. But someone like Doncic, it's only a 13-spot difference between his points value and his category value. But because his ADP is so low, he comes out as a nice steal for points leagues format. So that is something to pay attention to. Same with the table and Caris LeVert. I don't think I mentioned Caris. He's another guy who I think has got some pretty nice value. But of course, if Jim Butler does arrive in Brooklyn, I think a lot of LeVert's value could go unless he moves to Minnesota and steps into that starting small forward role over in Minnesota. Let's just talk about Jim for a second. I don't want to go too much more into this, but if Butler goes, does Tibbs start Derrick Rose? I think that's a legitimate possibility. I don't think he'd start Luol Deng, but it's in play, and if that happens, they're missing the playoffs. But I reckon he could start Rose alongside Wiggins and Teague, So good times for Minnesota, and I like Minnesota. I like Minnesota fans. I know quite a lot of them. But this is a disaster at this current stage. We will see what happens, of course, in the coming days. Let's have a look at the guys who get the biggest rises in points leagues versus category leagues. So the guys whose value jumps up the most. Not looking at guys right down the bottom of a list, but guys in that middle zone of who jumps up the most. And a guy that really pay attention to is Joshy Jackson, whose inefficiency is shithouse. Now, in terms of getting his minutes, it's going to be tough considering the Suns refuse to understand that you should be playing more wings rather than playing Booker at the 2 and Anderson at the 4. You could easily go Jackson, Ariza, Bridges in that lineup, or TJ Warren there, but no, we're going to be having 4 guys compete for minutes at one spot. That's going to impact what Jackson can do, but still, his value in a points league is almost 70 spots higher versus a category league. Now, his ADP is about the right spot, so he's not a huge value guy there in terms of where his ADP is, because I think he's significantly overvalued in category leagues with the ADP. But when you look at a points league, then he becomes right around that right spot and someone I would look at. Dwight Howard, of course, also gets that boost. The free throw percentage, you don't give two shits about that. In fact, get him to the line as many times as possible, because even if he's hitting 55% of them, that means you're getting points out of that. That's another 5-6 points per game, depending on how many times he actually gets the line. If he gets there 10 times, you get 6 extra points, and that obviously helps in a points league. So he's another guy with big value increases in a points format. And Brandon Ingram, another guy alongside Tristan Thompson. These are all guys with rises of over 60 spots in their points league value versus their category value. Now, I don't believe in Thompson all that much, but his high rebounding, the scoring, he blocks some shots. He'll probably play 20-odd minutes. There is Ante Zizic and Larry Nance Jr., but Ty Lue seem to rely on Thompson quite a bit. I probably wouldn't be taking him outside of a later pick or a deeper type points league, but I just wanted to illustrate how much his value does change in this situation. Colin Sexton gets a big bump as well. He's a poor efficiency sort of a guy, but I think just with bludgeoning the scoring, which I think he might have an opportunity to do in Cleveland, that he could be a 50-spot better guy with his points value versus his category value, but I still think he is somewhat overvalued in terms of ADP. Much like Dwight Howard, DeAndre Jordan and Steven Adams, they rise almost 50 spots in terms of their points league value versus category because of free throw percentage. Now, if you're punting free throw percentage, they're probably at a similar spot in terms of their overall numbers in a category league versus a points league. But if you're just looking at that overall number, they come in there. While Markelle Fultz, we know that his efficiency, and so much of this, as you can see, is based on efficiency, because points league does not care about efficiency at all. So Markelle Fultz at 48 spots higher than his category rank comes in points leagues. I'm getting more and more encouraged by Fultz. I still find it hard to see him being a top 60 type of guy this year, and someone's going to have to lose minutes for him to get that playing time. I think it's probably a combination of Šarić, Covington, and Redick, with maybe Šarić losing the most of those minutes, and TJ McConnell, of course. But Fultz is an interesting guy. The Fort, Kevin Knox and Marvin Bagley, inefficiency is going to hurt them in category leagues. We don't care about that in points leagues. I think Knox is going to have significant opportunity to score a bit in New York, so that helps him, and he becomes a pretty viable guy in points leagues. Now, I think his ADP is somewhat high in category leagues, but in points leagues, he gets that value back, and he's actually better than what his ADP might project him to be. And Bags as well, Marvin Bagley in Sacramento. I don't know what the hell Dave Yeager's going to do. I can almost be assured he's going to stuff it up. But if Bagley gets an opportunity, he is a high rebounding guy, can score. Blocks and steals, assists, maybe not so much, and efficiency is a problem, but again, we don't really give a shit about that. It's all going to come down to what sort of minutes Yeager ends up giving Marvin Bagley there in Sacramento, but he is a riser. Dennis Smith Jr. and Bam Adebayo are two guys, again, who rise about 40 spots in their value when we're looking at points leagues. I think that with Dwayne Wade coming back, it does hurt Bam a little bit. Now, if I was coaching the Heat, I just want to run Bam Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk as my centers and piss Hassan Whiteside off. But I don't think Eric Spoelstra is going to do that. And I say with Wade coming back, although this is going to depend on Dion Waiters, because if Dion Waiters isn't ready to go, which it looks like he won't be, then Bam is going to come into the rotation as that 10th guy and run 3 centers. But when Waiters is back, I think that pushes Bam perhaps out of the rotation on some of those nights. But he does get a big boost in terms of his value in points leagues. While Smith, again, efficiency hurt him from the line and from the field. He's going to get points. He's going to get assists. He's going to play minutes. And I don't worry about him playing next to Luka Doncic really at all. In fact, it probably helps him and probably helps his efficiency. But for points leagues, he is a much better option than what he is in category formats. And the other one, Pau Gasol, a guy who I think the minutes could be in trouble this year. Jakob Poeltl is around. I think he can take some minutes away from Pau this season. We've seen Gasol struggle at times and be really up and down with his playing time, but he can still put up some decent performances. But I think in points leagues, he works better than in a category format. So more of an appealing later round guy in points leagues versus where it seems in category leagues. I know some people want to look, who are the top guys in points leagues. You can check out all the projections on Basketball Monster, but the way that I've got the top 10 or top 12 shaping out, you've got Davis is on a per game basis. Davis comes in at 1, but Russell Westbrook, he gets the biggest bump from end of the first round right up to the top. Then you got Harden, Giannis, LeBron, Embiid is really up there. Jokic, Simmons, Towns, Kawhi, Lillard, and Drummond. That is the way the top 12 shakes out on a per game basis, and you'll see Durant's out of the top 12. Steph Curry in the standard points league format is a guy that may barely sneaks into the top 20 with that format. John Wall, also a pretty big riser. He is just outside that first round mark. Blake Griffin also rises pretty much, a big chunk at the start of that area where he moves into the top 25 as well in points league. So they're the big changes. Simmons with a big rise, Embiid with a big rise, Westbrook with a big rise as well at the pointy end. Drummond and Wall with Durant and Steph falling pretty significantly. Chris Paul also coming up there as well. So that's how the top end of a points league would shake out at the moment. Let's go to the guys who see their value fall in a points league. And not a surprise to me that it's the guys with high efficiency numbers that can be these players. Gary Harris is ranked 52 spots worse in a points league than he is in category league. So much of what he does comes from the steals. It comes from the high efficiency though, and that doesn't translate as well to a points league. So 52 spots lower, and that also pushes him well past his ADP range. So probably someone you don't want to look at in a points league. Same with Bob Covington, whose value, he's not a high volume guy. He's not scoring many points. It's the nice steals, which translate okay with the 3 points per steal, but it still doesn't make him worth his ADP number for a category league. So he's a 50 spot faller as well. Otto Porter, he drops quite a bit too. He's 50 spots lower than his ADP, 40 spots lower than his category rank. We know that his value is somewhat in his turnovers, but I don't care about that. But I'm talking about his efficiency numbers, his high field goal percentage, his ability to do little bits in other areas, and it doesn't translate well over to the points format. So these are guys that I think you should be avoiding drafting, especially at their ADP type numbers. Kyle Korver, his value only comes from threes. He does nothing else, but that can be useful in fantasy. In categories, get 2.5 threes, maybe a game. You can actually slide that in, and he does it efficiently. That's useful. But in a points league, it means nothing. Daz Collison, another high efficiency guy, a 50% field goal guy as a point guard is really, really hard to find, and it means jack shit when you're looking at points league. So don't worry too much about him. Same with Jingle and Joe Ingles, 37 spots lower in a points league than category leagues and well below his ADP. The interesting guy here is Budrick Hield. He is 34 points lower in a points league versus a category league, but because his ADP is so low, he still is someone you can look at. Just 7 spots difference between his ADP and his points ranking, the way I currently see it. That's assuming that his high steal rate continues and he does get more minutes, which I expect him to do this season in Sacramento, but he may not do that. And if he doesn't, then the value's not there. But he loses a lot of value in a points league versus a category league, but still hovers around that ADP mark. And the same you'll see for Johnny Isaac down the bottom as well. Klay Thompson just wildly off, doesn't get tons of value in points league, almost 70 spots difference from his ADP versus his actual points league numbers. That's not ideal. You got the same with JJ Redick. These 3-point shooters don't really get any sort of bonus in these points leagues formats. So Redick and Thompson, both 70 points off their rank versus their ADP. Jordy Bell, high efficiency sort of player, that high field goal percentage, the decent steals and block numbers, which work really well in category leagues, doesn't suit him so much in a points league. And Seth Curry, another high efficiency 3-point shooter, like Ingles, like Hield, like Korver, like Gaz Harris, like Redick. It's a common theme. And you can see these guys falling down with that big significant difference. The last 3 guys I've got on this list here, another 3-point shooter in Marco Bellinelli, who falls way off, 31 points lower. But Joshi Richardson and John Isaac also lose a ton of value. 2 of my favorite players both 31 spots lower in points leagues versus category leagues because they're low volume scorers who do things in other areas. The nice blocks that Richardson gets are super valuable, but 1 block per game gives you 3 points. If he scores 14 points, with scoring, it's not enough. But in categories, that 1 block is so important. Same with Isaac, 1.5 steals, 1.5 blocks. Great, that gives you a little bit in points league. But if he's averaging 11 points scoring, then what's the point of it? And he drops way down. But the positive thing with those guys is their ADP numbers are actually lower than their real life category value. So you could still look to draft them as opposed to a Clay who's 70 spots off, or a Porter who's 50 spots off, or a Covington who's 51, or a Gaz Harris who's 47 spots off. So they're guys who you should be looking to really, steer clear of in terms of their points leagues value, where that difference between the points and categories really does change quite considerably for those guys. So I think that's just a short and sweet podcast after yesterday's 2-hour marathon, which you're probably still getting through. Just talking about some of the differences in points leagues versus category leagues. Efficiency doesn't matter. Volume is all that matters. The more you score, the more important it is. And this is why it's important to know, because 1 point equals 1 point in point scoring. 1 block equals 3 points. But the league leader in blocks scores 2 a game, or blocks 2 shots a game. The league leader in scoring scores 30 points a game. So 30 points equals 30 fantasy points. 2 blocks equals 6 fantasy points. And you can see the difference. The league leader in steals with Oladipo at 2.6 or 2.5. What does that give you? It gives you 7.5 points. The league leader in scoring gets 30 points. It's a big, big difference. The leader in rebounds was Andre Drummond at 15 rebounds per game, and you get 1.2 points. And I'm trying to do some quick maths here in my head to get that number, but that's about 18 fantasy points. The league leader in scoring gives you 30 points. So if you score, that's where your value comes from. The league leader in assists was 10 assists with Russell Westbrook. That's 15 points. Again, half as valuable as the leading scorer. So this is the thing you need to pay attention to with points leagues. Tomorrow we're going to be doing a points league mock with myself and some Patreon subscribers, so stay tuned for that one. I'll go through and talk about all my picks. I've got no idea where I'm picking at this point. And you can see how that plays out. I'll give some discussion on players and see if other people in that league actually paid attention to this show. And we'll see if some of these guys like Gaz, like Otto Porter, if these guys start falling, which they should, down to the 80s and 90s type of range rather than the 40s or 50s. Go and subscribe to this podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify. Give it 5 stars. Do it on YouTube. Give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment. You know the drill. And check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network. Check out our new college shows, which are coming out. Locked On Seminoles, Locked On Wolverines have come out this week as well. So go and check that out, and check out the rest. NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, much more coming your way on the Locked On Podcast Network. Basketball Monster subscriptions are open. Go figure those out. Go have a look there. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Miles Bridges.